يحيى خذ الكتاب بقوة وآتيناه الحكم صبيا إذ قال الله يا عيسى إني متوفيك ورافعك إلي محمد رسول الله.
السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا، من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله. اللهم صل وسلم وبارك عليه وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم. We continue inshallah ta'ala with the tafsir of Surat Al-Israa, Surah number 17. And in this episode, inshallah ta'ala, we'll cover verses 61 all the way to 65, from 61 to 65. And in this section, it talks about Adam alayhi salam and Iblis, the devil, when he refused to make sujood to Adam alayhi salam. And as we know that this is repeated from one surah to the other, and there's a great wisdom behind knowing how things happened, and to be warned against the deception of Shaytan, the deception of the devil. This is a reality that is happening, and it's continuously happening. And many people, they don't realize it, they don't see it because it's unseen. And when it comes to al-iman bil-ghayb, believing in the unseen is one of the foundations of al-iman. Actually, there's no iman without believing in the unseen. There's no faith unless it's unseen. Because of something that is seen, you don't say, I believe that there's a book in front of me. Right? There's a book in front of you, you see it. You believe that means it's something that is unseen. So the believers, يُؤْمِنُونَ بِالْغَيْبِ, they believe in the unseen. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in the revelation in the Qur'an, reveals to us, and of course in the previous books, the issue of the devil. It's a real thing, and Iblis is still alive. From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows when, and when he refused to make sujood to Adam alayhi salam, he was given, as it's going to be mentioned, given the state of life that he would continue to live till the day of judgment. But what's the job of Shaytan, Satan, the devil? This is what the verses talks about, and it's not as a fairy tale. This is for the reality to be clear, for us to witness it and to see it with our hearts, so that we're able to figure out what's the meaning of deception versus what's the reality of things. What's the truth versus falsehood, so that we are not deceived, because it's very easy to be deceived. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala protect us from the deception of the shaitan. So let's get into the verses inshallah and reflect upon them. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He makes our hearts to work. This is basically what's the purpose of this. We're going into depth into the verses so that the heart's working, so that we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala according to what we see and reflect and believe in the book of Allah. Verse number 61. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم وإذ قلنا للملائكة اسجدوا لآدم فسجدوا إلا إبليس قال أسجد لمن خلقت طينا. And mention when we said to the angels, prostrate to Adam. And they prostrated except for Iblis. He said, should I prostrate to one you created from clay? So the verses of and the story of Adam alayhi salam has been mentioned in many verses, in many surahs in the Qur'an, and in different wordings. And it gives similar meanings, but every place is unique, because the Qur'an is the miraculous words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So without going into the story as a story, we're going through the context of the verses in whatever surah that we're going through, without going to other surahs of the Qur'an, trying to explain in the light of other verses the story of Adam alayhi salam. In this surah, in Surat Al-Israa, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا, and remember. وَإِذْ means and remember. And it's not something that we saw with our own eyes, but something for our hearts to see, because this is something that happened. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is addressing the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and the ummah of the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam. He says, وَإِذْ قُلْنَا لِلْمَلَائِكَةِ. Surah Al-Baqarah talks about what happened even before that. But here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and remember when we said to the angels, Al-Malaika, a creation of Allah, created from light, They are in constant worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They're never bored, they're never tired. And they are given and trusted with certain jobs that by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to the angels after He created Adam alayhi salam, He said, Usjudu li Adam. Make sujood to Adam alayhi salam. Who's the one that is commanding them? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the details of that is mentioned in Surah Al-Baqarah and other surahs. But He says, Usjudu li Adam. Make sujood to Adam alayhi salam. So as a result of that, the angels, they don't disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They immediately submit themselves to the commands of Allah. فَسَجَدُوا. So, and the fa here, it shows how fast it is. They immediately made sujood. By the way, as we know that the sujood is, for us as human beings, when we make sujood, the Prophet ﷺ, he said, I was commanded to make sujood on 7 bones. And that is the 2 set of toes, and the knees, and the palm, and these are these are 6. And the Prophet ﷺ pointed at his nose and the forehead. So this is 1. So this is the organs physically when we make sujood, and the sujood is ibadah. And the ibadah is only to be done to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And for the angels, this is a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that they did not worship Adam alayhi salam. This was a command from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for them to make sujood to Adam alayhi salam. فَسَجَدُوا. So they made sujood. إِلَّا Iblis. Except Iblis. This is what is the name of the father of all of the devils and the jinn, which is Iblis. And it comes from someone that is renegated away from the obedience of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And Iblis, he was not an angel, but he was in the company of the angels. And this is stated in other verses in the Qur'an. That Iblis kana min al-jinn, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says. فَفَسَقَ عَنْ أَمْرِ رَبِّهِ. He was from the jinn, and he rebelled against the commands of Allah. So he had a choice. Iblis, he had a choice. So he did not, meaning not a choice, that approved choice. That means he had a choice whether to be good or to be evil. So he refused to make sujood to Adam alayhi salam, disobeyed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator of the heavens and the earth. إِلَّا إِبْلِيسَ قَالْ. He said, أَأَسْجُدُ لِمَنْ خَلَقَ تَطِينًا. Should I make sujood? أَأَسْجُد. Questioning. Should I make sujood to the one that you khalaqta, that you created, طِينًا, from mud, from clay? And this is the arrogance of Iblis, as it's stated also in other verses in the Qur'an. That Iblis, he says, لَمْ أَكُنْ لِأَسْجُدَ لِبَشَرٍ خَلَقْتَهُ مِنْ صَلْصَالٍ مِنْ حَمَإٍ مَسْنُونٍ, as it's mentioned in other verses. How can I make sujood to someone that you created from clay, when Iblis was created from the fire? So he, according to his corrupted analogy, that fire is of a higher status than the clay. So arrogance that stopped him from obeying the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. قَالَ أَأَسْجُدُ لِمَنْ خَلَقَ تَطِينًا. That's why Iblis, the head of the devil, Satan, was the first one to use a corrupted analogy. Analogy is good if it's done in the proper way. And this is part of the tashri', part of the legislation for us, with the proper ways that the ulama, may Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala have mercy upon, established. But there is corrupted analogy. Sometimes people, they make analogy that is corrupted, one of which is Iblis. Why? Because if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded the people to do something, and it becomes clear to them that this is the command of Allah, that means the matter is over. Their job is to obey the commands of Allah. Their job is to submit themselves, not to make analogies, not to change and alter the commands of Allah. So anyway, then the next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قَالَ أَرَأَيْتَكَ هَذَا الَّذِي كَرَّمْتَ عَلَيْهِ لَإِنْ أَخَّرْتَنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ ذُرِّيَّتَهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. Which means Iblis said, do you see this one whom you have honored above me? If you delay me until the day of resurrection, I will surely destroy his descendants except for a few. So in these verses does not mention all of the details of what happened, and we don't need to in this context, right? We just need to follow what the verses are saying. So Iblis, when he refused and he was kicked out of the mercy of Allah, as the verses of the Qur'an mentions, and that he is warned and made the matter very clear that he's going to be from the people of the hellfire forever as a result of disobeying this command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for him to stay till the day of judgment, and he was granted this for the test of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for the human beings on the face of earth. That is, Iblis is going to whisper to them. He will adorn the evil for them. And there is guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is going to be sent to the human beings, revelation from Allah. So now you have two things, the truth and the ultimate truth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will send to the human beings, the revelation from Allah. And of course that fits perfectly their pure nature, their fitrah. And then they have the whispers of Iblis and the helpers of Iblis, the deception. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. So Iblis said, after the matter has been made clear to him, he says, قَالَ أَرَأَيْتَكَ هَذَا الَّذِي كَرَّمْتَ عَلَيْهِ, that do you see the one that you honored above me? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ, and it's mentioned in the surah, also Surat Al-Israa, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala honored the sons of Adam, honored Adam alayhi salam when he commanded the angels to make sujood to Adam alayhi salam. And Adam alayhi salam is a prophet of Allah, versus how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cursed Iblis as a result of disobeying the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Iblis says, أَرَأَيْتَ, do you see the one that you karramta, that you honored, alayya, above me, لَإِنْ أَخَّرْتَنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ, if you would delay me, if you would delay my death till the day of Al-Qiyamah, لَإِنْ أَخَّرْتَنِي, and التأخير is when something is delayed. So Iblis, he asked Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to keep him alive till the day of judgment. لَإِنْ أَخَّرْتَنِي إِلَى يَوْمِ الْقِيَامَةِ. What's Iblis going to do? He's going to sit and enjoy his life and eat and drink and have palaces and to enjoy these millions of years or whatever years, before the day of resurrection? No. He has a job. لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ ذُرِّيَّتَهُ إِلَّا قَلِيلًا. As you see, لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ, that means he will destroy his descendants. لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ comes originally, literally, from where they put the rein by the mouth of the horse to pull it back or to control its movement. So as you see, to control it. So لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ ذُرِّيَّتَهُ, Iblis, he wants to control the human beings, to destroy them. He wants to make sure that they will be with him in the hellfire in the day of Al-Qiyamah, because Iblis is going to be in the hellfire. So he wants as many of the human beings to be with him in the day of judgment by whispering to them, as this is the only power of Iblis, is to whisper, to adorn the evil for them. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, except few of them. That means most of them. This is what Iblis, he made this upon himself, that you would find most of these human beings, they would be followers of me, followers of Satan. They will be among the people of the hellfire. And why did Iblis, was he sure about this? Because his arrogance, his evil, he's a pure evil, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made such a thing in his heart, that he's pure evil, that he knows that the human beings, they have a choice. And the human beings, they are driven either with their aql and reasoning versus their desires. So he's going to play on their desires and corrupting their reasoning, so that they turn away from what is best for them to follow the ways of Shaytan, so that they enter the hellfire. And it's repeated throughout the Qur'an in many verses in different contexts, but this is basically what the verse is saying, لَأَحْتَنِكَنَّ ذُرِّيَّتَهُ. So as a result of controlling them, that means for them to be destroyed. إِلَّا قَلِيلًا, except very few of them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala replied to Iblis, but as you see here, the enmity of Iblis, there's no like of it, that is never heard of. If you think of anyone that has enmity and hatred and grudges inside, you would never think of someone like Iblis. Someone that never give up, something that is 24 hours is working, having his deputies, armies, sending them all over the earth to spread corruption and bloodshed and evil and disbelief and all kinds of things and all kinds of corrupted analogies, because he's the head of those who have corrupted analogy, right? Turning the people away from the revelation from Allah, and this is what Iblis is upon, and he is going to be alive till the day of judgment and directing all of his deputies and armies that worship him besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll continue inshallah ta'ala with the next verses, continuing that story after the break, so stay with us inshallah.
محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. We continue with verses 61 to 65 from Surat Al-Israa and the story of Adam alayhi salam and Iblis and the lessons learned, because the Qur'an, we are reciting the Qur'an, we're reflecting upon the Qur'an, inshallah ta'ala, for our own benefit, to be warned against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned against, and one of which is Iblis, and how in verse number 62 mentioned how Iblis took it upon himself, by the permission of Allah of course, that he would deceive the human beings, that he would control them according to what he said, to destroy them, to make them among the people of the hellfire. So then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by the wisdom of Allah, by the mercy of Allah and the justice of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, he said subhanahu wa ta'ala to Iblis, as it's mentioned in verse number 63, قَالَ اذْهَبْ فَمَنْ تَبِعَكَ مِنْهُمْ فَإِنَّ جَهَنَّمَ جَزَاؤُكُمْ جَزَاءً مَوْفُورًا. Allah said, go, for whoever of them follows you, indeed hell will be the recompense of you, an ample recompense. So here in these verses, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said to Iblis, idhab, go. That means go and do what you said. So this is by the universal permission of Allah. That means Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decreed that Iblis would do these evil actions, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not decree pure evil, by the way. The pure evil is not to be attributed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But Iblis, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala permitted that for the great goodness that comes as a result of that. What is this great goodness and wisdom of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That you would have believers, those who would have the whispers of Satan, Shaytan, the devil, and they have the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they would choose the revelation of Allah over the whispers and the adornment of the evil that the Shaytan is whispering to them. That's a great level of goodness, nobility, pureness of the heart, and all kinds of beautiful things. Worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes as a result of this. If this struggle is not there, many acts of worship is not going to be established. So the fact that a person would struggle within their own selves, be patient and have the hope for the rewards of Allah, fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, put forward the love of Allah before the love of their own desires, for example, especially that the matter is means of deception by Shaytan. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave that permission, and the commands of Allah are of two types. Either it's for something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves and wants the believers to do, versus the universal commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that Iblis was allowed, for example, to have this is not really power, but it's only whispering to the people. One of the advantages that Iblis has over the human beings, the ones that are deceived and those who turn away from the revelation from Allah, is that he sees them and they don't see him. إِنَّهُ يَرَاكُمْ هُوَ وَقَبِيلُهُ مِنْ حَيْثُ لَا تَرَوْنَهُمْ. That means, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, he sees you, he and his helpers and deputies and armies, from where you do not see him. We don't see Iblis, right? And the Iblis, he sees us. And the Shayateen, they see us. And Shaytan قَعَدَ لِبْنِ آدَمْ بِأَطْرُقِهِ كُلِّهَا, as the Prophet ﷺ, he said, Shaytan sat by the son of Adam in every path he takes. It doesn't matter where you go. There is Shaytan is waiting for you to do what? To force you? For you to be scared of it? No. It's to whisper. He does nothing but whispering for people to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to take them step by step. And these khutuwat that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala warned us against the Shaytan, and the khutuwat and the steps of Shaytan, are all made clear in the Qur'an and in the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So whoever wants to be protected from the deception of Iblis, of Shaytan, then he has to hold fast to the revelation from Allah. Those who turn away from the revelation of Allah, they are easy targets of Iblis, Shaytan. Why? Because these types of deceptions, people would attribute it to themselves. You would find a disbeliever arrogantly saying, this is what I see is right. This is what is correct versus what is wrong. Has no basis of revelation. When a human being does not act and say based on revelation, that means they are deceived by Shaytan, which is a very obvious thing. Or someone commits sins and he would justify the sins for himself. Iblis is adorning, Shaytan is adorning the evil for them. whether it's make them delay or think that the punishment of Allah is far to happen, if it's they're disbelievers or a believer. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most forgiver. Enjoy your life, you're still young, right? Those who were before you, look at the old ones, they used to also enjoy their sinful life when they were young, and then they repented to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala later on. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful, and He uses all kinds of things. And for other people, according to what's in their hearts, what's wrong with this? And He take them one step after the other. Steps of shaitan, all deception, whether it's to belittle the sin, to make them revenge against others, to justify whatever evil, matters of belief, bringing doubts into the hearts of the people. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, idhab, that means He gave him that power which is just to whisper, not power, not physical power. فَمَنْ تَبِعَكَ مِنْهُمْ, whoever follows you among them, meaning from the human beings, فَإِنَّ جَهَنَّمَ جَزَاؤُكُمْ جَزَاءً مَوْفُورًا. That means this is the recompense. Your recompense, your place, your abode is going to be the hellfire, all of you. An ample recompense in full. That means they would receive this recompense by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but with the condition of what? Al-ittiba', following Iblis. So really how the matter is easy is that word tabi'ak, whoever follows you. The noun of it is al-ittiba', to follow. So either a person follows Shaytan, Iblis, and one's desires and so on, or a person would follow the wahi from Allah, the revelation from Allah. And there's no third choice here. And that's why when sometimes people, they say, we always blame Shaytan, blaming Shaytan. Does that mean that we are free from being blamed? When you blame Shaytan, you're blaming the human beings. Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the matter very clear. So who are the ones to be blamed? Oneself. We are the ones that would, if you follow the ways of the Shaitan, we are the ones to be blamed. Shaitan would distance himself, disloyal himself from the people in the Day of Judgment. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most just. Especially that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala made the matter very clear. So the people are warned against him. And therefore, knowing this, then the person would turn away from the ways of Iblis by receiving the revelation from Allah, by following the revelation from Allah. That's why when we keep on repeating that this entire matter is about following, and for the believers really to see things in the right way. Human beings are followers, and never to be deceived that someone he's not a follower. He says, I don't follow nobody whatsoever. No, you're following your own desire, you're following your shaitan that is adorning the evil for you, right? So either to follow one's desire, the whispers of shaitan, versus the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Do we have to know whether it's our desires versus the adornment of shaitan? This is a matter of unseen to us. We don't need to know that this is exactly this versus that, because we have revelation from Allah. Follow the revelation from Allah. Anything other than that, anything that opposes that, that means you know that this is the ways of Iblis is adorning it for you. This is the way of one's desires that get developed as a result of following the ways of Iblis. The hearts get corrupted and so on. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, whoever follows you, then you will have the recompense in the Day of Judgment, which is the hellfire for the followers of Iblis. So those who enter the hellfire, they are the followers of Iblis. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَقَدْ صَدَّقَ عَلَيْهِمْ إِبْلِيسُ وَظَنَّهُ فَاتَّبَعُوا إِلَى فَرِيقٍ مِّنَ الْمُؤْمِنِينَ. That means Iblis has been truthful in what he said, meaning what he promised upon himself. And that's all by the permission of Allah, that most of the people followed him, except a group which is the believers. So the believers are the ones that are saved from this ultimate following of Iblis that would make them enter the hellfire, wal-'adhu billah. So then after that, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the next verse, talks about how Iblis is going to go about when it comes to deceiving the people. This is in verse number 64. Before we get into the details here, it's important that we understand the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Nothing is the like of it. So when we're reading the verses of the Qur'an, nothing can be more clearer to us, the ways of Iblis, because it's hidden, better than the words of Allah. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, and we read the verse and then we can describe it in the next section inshallah ta'ala. He says, وَاسْتَفْزِزْ مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتَ مِنْهُمْ بِصَوْتِكَ وَأَجْلِبْ عَلَيْهِمْ بِخَيْلِكَ وَرَجِلِكَ وَشَارِكْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ وَعِدُهُمْ وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا, which means an incite to senselessness, whoever you can among them with your voice, and assault them with your horses and foot soldiers, and become a partner in their wealth and their children, and promise them. But Satan does not promise them except delusion. So now this is the plan, this is the power of Iblis. This is the power of Iblis that is given, and it's not really power, because again it's only whispers, as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala stated in the Qur'an. So let's see basically what is mentioned in these verses and how to protect ourselves, because once you know your enemy, then, and also you know how to protect yourself from your enemy, then you're not afraid of anything. Why? Because you know exactly how to protect yourself. But the problem is when people are ignorant about the matter, or they don't know their enemy very well, and they don't have protections as a result of that, then they can be easy target of Iblis wal-'iyadhu billah. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the knowledge and the tawfiq and the help to be protected. We'll continue inshallah ta'ala after we read the verse, then we go straight to it inshallah ta'ala after the break and the next one also. So stay with us inshallah.
محمد رسول الله محمد رسول الله.
Alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala rasulillah, wa ba'd. Continuing with verses 61 to 65 from Surah Al-Israa, and the ways of Iblis, the ways of Shaytan, the devil. And we ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to protect us from the ways and the deception of Shaytan. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. The matter is so clear in the book of Allah. Really, there is no excuse. We are commanded to read the book of Allah, and we find the matter very clear to us. Verse number 64 that we just read the translation of it. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says to Iblis, this is what Iblis is going to do to the people. And in other verses of the Qur'an also talks about some of the details. Here it says, وَاسْتَفْزِزْ مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتَ مِنْهُمْ. Istafziz, that means incite those who you have the ability to incite. With what? بصوتك, with your voice. And وَأَجْلِبْ عَلَيْهِمْ بِخَيْرِكَ وَرَجْلِكَ. And also assault them. أَجْلِبْ عَلَيْهِمْ, and this is a word that is used in the war, with the army assaulting another army, with your horses and foot soldiers. خَيْلِكَ وَرَجْلِكَ. And the third one, وَشَارِكْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ. وَعِدْهُمْ, number 4. That means you become partners with them in their wealth and their children, and promise them. So let's go one by one briefly inshallah ta'ala. The word that is used here was tafziz. Al-istifzaz is when someone is incited from being idle to move. Right? So the shaitan is inciting the people. Inciting what? Evil. So وَاسْتَفْزِزْ مَنِ اسْتَطَعْتَ مِنْهُمْ. Make this to whoever you have ability to do, those who followed you, those who would receive this whispers from the shaitan and be deceived by you, بصوتك, by your voice. The tafsir of the Sahaba, the Tabi'een, like Abdullah ibn Abbas and others, they said, and this is part of the tafsir with al-mithal, the tafsir with an example. He said, bil-ghina. Shaitan, he incites the people with songs, with music. This is one of the ways of Iblis, to incite people to do what? To disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to sin. And as a result of that, they would drink, they would commit adultery, they would become forgetful, they don't worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they become arrogant, they turn away from the purpose of their life become just being busy with entertainment and following their desires and drinking and parties, and this is basically the life of many people. They might work hard to earn money, to have means of sustenance so that they can enjoy the life that they live in this life, and turning away from knowing what's the purpose of this life. They can be decent people, they can be nice people, but they're not aware of what's there on the face of earth for. Shaitan is keeping them busy with things so that they turn away from listening to the wahy from Allah, listening to the Qur'an, listening to the message of the messengers. So they would say, let's just enjoy whatever we have. Enjoy. Becomes an industry. and billions of wealth is being spent to take people away from the seriousness of this life. So this is one of the things. And whatever voices of the evil ones, and he whispers to those who would spread whatever voices of evil, whether it's spreading doubts among the people, disbelief, threats, evil threats, injustices, singing and music and all of that. And these are statements. Mujahid, one of the Imam of the Tafsir, Ibn Abbas, radiallahu anhuma, the Sahaba, they mentioned that. So that we warn ourselves, don't be deceived. That means turn away from these types of things, music and singing and all of that. And pay attention to what is enjoyable in this life in the halal way, in the permissible way. وَأَجْلِبْ عَلَيْهِمْ بِخَيْلِكَ وَرَجِلِكَ. Here this is physically, as we heard in the translation. Al-khayl is the horses. وَرَجِلِكَ, the walking ones. You know, in the armies, in the times, in the old days, some of them would ride horses and some of them would be on their foot, fighting with the swords. So this refers, as the ulama they say in the tafsir, that means you come with whatever means you have to assault the people. All of what you have in your power. So the whispering to them, enticing people to attack others, you know, even with things like wars and shedding blood and so on. Iblis is playing with these human beings like puppets, enticing evil, enticing bloodshed, all kinds of evil, and he's working on this. So this is basically whatever you have means that you are given, which is only to adorn the evil to the people. So if someone has power, to abuse his power. If someone has wealth, to abuse the way that he earns and the way that he spends. And all kinds of sins and corruption, and whether it's in relationships, when a person is alone, Shaytan is adorning the evil. وَشَارِكْهُمْ فِي الْأَمْوَالِ وَالْأَوْلَادِ وَعِدْهُمْ. And be partners with them with regards to their wealth and their children. What is the meaning of partners? That means he is with them with their dealing with their wealth. Partners with them, that means he make them earn it from haram. He's partners with them because he's adorning the evil for them. Oh, this is a great deal, but it's haram, something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. He would say to the thief, steal. He would say to the one that wants to deal with riba usury, deal with usury with riba. Cheating, bribery, whatever means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala forbade. And the person becomes a partner with Iblis. So they're both partners in the evil. Iblis get a sin, and also that individual gets the sin without relieving the individual from the sin that he incurred upon himself. And wal awlad, and in your children, to raise your children to be evildoers, to be helpers of Iblis. Don't raise them. This is the whispers of Shaytan. For the people not to raise them as believers, as people that are obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but rather to make them foolish, to make them enjoy the materialistic things in this life. And this is the ultimate goal. Really, when you look into the reality of this life, what is it that a person would be himself and raising his family, thinking that he is such a decent person, working hard for the success of his family? What is the definition of success? You made them in the highest levels of society. You made them wealthy. You made them, have a good conduct in the way they conduct themselves. MashaAllah, beautiful. But then what's after that? What's the end of it? And for them to enter the hellfire at the end, did they fulfill the purpose of their life? Were they obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? Following what? Following their desires versus following the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this is one of the ways of Iblis, partnering with the people so that with their wealth, with their offsprings, to disobey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And wa'idhum, and promise them. Keep on promising the people, promising them poverty if they want to give something in charity. As Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says in the Qur'an, الشيطان يعدكم الفقر. The shaitan, he promises you poverty. When is that in the context of giving charity? You want to give your zakah, then the shaitan comes and whispers. Or if you give zakah from your wealth, you'll be poor. Who's going to take care of your children? Who's going to take care of your wife? Who's going to take care of your needs? So that makes a person greedy and stingy. Whether it's zakah, whether it's charities, so this is with regards to the promise of shaitan. Promising the people that they will enjoy so much. Commit that sin. And of course, he doesn't call it as a sin. Enjoy yourself. Again, you're still young. Don't wear hijab, you're still young. Wait till you get married. Even for the most evil people, shed blood, he would whisper to the people, because this is how you're going to protect yourself, or whatever. It's all promises, vain promises for the adornment of this life. And even Shaytan can promise people false promises with the hereafter. When he promised the deviant ones, when he promised the disbelievers, or they would, for example, promising those who worship idols, when they say, هؤلاء شفعاؤنا عند الله, they will intercede for you in the day of judgment. Where did you come up with this? Iblis, or their own desires. But it's not revelation from Allah. There's no revelation in that from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He revealed, previous books, the book of Allah, the Qur'an, that invites the people to worship other than Allah. Or making up religions, claiming that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has a son, believe that He has a son. Where did that come from? No revelation that states this whatsoever. It's all the ways of Iblis. The ways of Iblis, that he adorns the evil for the people and he promises them. If you believe this way, you will be among the people of Jannah, you will protect yourself from the hellfire, right? And so on. A person would say, how can we protect ourselves? This is very deceiving. And everybody claims that they will go to Jannah if they do this, or they go to the hellfire. The wahy from Allah. That's the thing between us and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Revelation from Allah. If it's not revelation from Allah, nobody knows. It's very interesting and funny and sad when people sometimes they say that they were inspired by God, and they would say such a thing, or they believe such a thing. Why is it from God and not from Shaytan? How would you know that this is not from the Shaytan? Because he says, I'm your creator, for example. So the Shaytan has his ways, and he's a liar. So when a person trusts himself, meaning in the sense that his own reasoning and his own feelings and all of these things, when it's opposes to the wahy, that shows the importance of the revelation from Allah. So the wahy from Allah, the Qur'an, the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ, this is what a Muslim learn, this is what a believer hold fast to, and you would find that this is the perfect way of thinking and the perfect desire and everything else, to be protected from the promises, the false promises of Shaytan. وَمَا يَعِدُهُمُ الشَّيْطَانُ إِلَّا غُرُورًا. This is how the verse ended. The Shaytan, he only promises them only غُرُورًا, deception. There's no good end to them. It's only for temporary life that they live in, and afterwards everybody shall return to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The next verse, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says then about the believers, إِنَّ عِبَادِي لَيْسَ لَكَ عَلَيْهِمْ سُلْطَانٌ وَكَفَى بِرَبِّكَ وَكِيلًا. Indeed, over my believing servants there is for you no authority, and sufficient is your Lord as disposer of affairs. So who are the ones that's going to be saved from Shaytan, from the devil? The ibad of Allah, the servants of Allah. Everyone is the servant of Allah. But what is meant by ibad here in this context, in this verse, are those who willingly believed in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and are obedient to Allah. And the word ibad, that means they are slaves of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That means they don't have a say whenever the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala comes. So they're attached to the revelation from Allah. They follow it. The following of a abd to his master. The follow of a slave to his master. His master is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. He says, commanding him to worship him alone, he says, سَمِعْنَا وَأَطَعْنَا, we listen and we obey. Pray 5 times a day, we listen and we obey. Give the zakah, we listen and we obey. Stay away from the haram, we listen and we obey. Do you have to understand the wisdom behind it? Sure, if you want to, that's fine. What if you don't? You're a abd. And that's why the understanding and the significance of these words, it has a meaning to it. So, ibadi, my slaves, my servants, those who are obedient to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their concern is to know what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants from them, and they have nothing but to submit themselves to the commands of Allah. If they are upon this state and this way, Shaytan, the devil, has no authority over them. As we said before, does Shaytan has authority? His authority is adorning the evil. That's it. He does not force anyone physically to do anything. He just adorned the evil for them. And then they follow him, so as if he is in control of them. He becomes very powerful over them because they keep on following him and blindly following the ways of Shaytan. But for the believers, he has no authority over them. Why? Because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said they have fulfilled the purpose of their life being ibad. Does that mean that the believers don't fall into sins as a way of whispers of Shaytan? Of course they do. But it's a weakness, a moment of weakness, overpowered, things like this, and then immediately they repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So therefore there's no sultan. A sultan is when someone quit repenting to Allah. That means the authority now is for the devil and they follow him. But when someone constantly repenting to Allah, we all make mistakes. We're weak. We're bound to make mistakes. But constantly repenting to Allah, being attached to the revelation from Allah, and with relying upon Allah. وَكَفَى بِرَبِّكَ وَكِيلًا. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is sufficient for them as disposer of their affairs. So they rely upon Allah, and that's why when we say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم, we seek refuge in Allah from the cursed shaitan. Before we recite the Qur'an, before we do anything, and especially, for example, when you recite the Qur'an. Why? Because this is what you're supposed to follow. What's the wisdom? Because that's the way the Prophet ﷺ, this is what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala commanded us in the Qur'an. Before you recite the Qur'an, you say أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم. Why? Because now you are commanded to follow the wahy. This is the worst thing for shaitan. Shaitan, the devil, he wants you to turn away from the Qur'an so that you follow him. Because either you follow the shaitan, the devil, or you follow the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. To be upon this is to rely upon Allah and to put our trust in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and to leave the matter to Allah. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that runs the affairs of everyone and the affairs of the believers, and He's the one that protects them from the whispers of shaitan, and to be diligent in learning the revelation from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. There are great lessons to be learned, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the most merciful. He made the matter very clear to us, and what's left for us is to be obedient to Allah and to follow the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. And if we slip, we repent to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but knowing the footsteps, knowing the deception of shaitan, and knowing the ways of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the face of earth, which is the only source for that is revelation from Allah, the Qur'an and the Sunnah of the Prophet ﷺ. So ask Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to make us benefit from what we heard, and we continue inshallah ta'ala next time with more verses in Surah Al-Israa. وصلى الله وسلم وبارك على محمد وعلى آله وصحبه وسلم والسلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.
إلا الذين تابوا وأصلحوا وبينوا فأولئك أتوب عليهم وأنا التواب الرحيم.
فادعوا الله مخلصين له الدين ولو كره الكافرون.
يا زكريا إنا نبشرك بغلام.
يا أيها النبي إنا أرسلناك شاهدا ومبشرا